Good morning. My name is Whitney Meisner, and I am the Director of Empatica Leadership. And today's question comes from a former student of mine, and it's a multi-part question, so compelling that I wanted to include all parts. So to begin with, if our graduation literacy is about 50% and our math literacy is about 35%, why is our graduation rate about 75%? Wow, such a great question. The math doesn't math there, does it? I think there's two ways to respond. First of all, graduation has gotten a lot more complex in my lifetime. It used to be credits only until the mid 90s, and it's gotten increasingly more and more specific within the state of Washington on what students need to graduate, and test scores became a part of it in the early 2000s. So when test scores became a part of it, there were lots of things that districts did to address that. And one of the things the State Board of Education has done throughout the years is create alternatives to the test to allow students to show proficiency in different ways. For example, one of the ways that students now can show proficiency is a career pathway. And so if they are on a CTE path and they show that they have taken path credits toward achieving industry certification, that can be in place of the test scores. So just know that there's lots of reasons. There's also ways that students can have alternative tests depending on if they have a disability and an IEP that modifies their graduation requirements. So if you have questions about that, about alternatives to graduation, please add that question below and I can do a longer conversation about that. But the real question is, why aren't students graduating with the math and literacy skills that they need? And I think that's a really important question to ask. I personally don't think your score on a standardized test is the only way to show that you're literate in math or language. But when we are not showing that the majority of our students are able to show competency on a test, it's a problem. And so I do think that parents should be asking for early screening to find out what are my students' abilities and what are they missing so that we can be addressing that in our public school system. One of the things that was mentioned is dyslexia screening. And I know this is becoming more common in elementary schools, but it really needs to be something that we know more about. Many students who are diagnosed with a disability and placed in special education actually have dyslexia that is undiagnosed. And if we're giving them special education based on something that's not entirely accurate, that's problematic. I think the other thing that schools really need to consider is, how do we let the data tell our story and make sure that we're doing things that are in the best interest of kids? For example, when I was a high school principal, I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to work with the most amazing teachers and community ever. And we made a collective decision that we were not going to offer intervention classes outside of special education. We were going to embed intervention into really fun, rigorous, exciting current technical education classes like woodshop, horticulture, foods, technology, and so forth. And what we found was that students were able to pass exams because they were learning the math and literacy in context of things that they loved. And our graduation rate was high and our test scores were high at the same time. And that really speaks to that third question there of why is the only option for getting a meaningful education in rural areas right now to go out of district or private? That breaks my heart because I know for a fact that many rural school districts are doing incredible things to keep kids place-based and learning and succeeding right in their hometowns. It's definitely possible. And it takes people being willing to have hard conversations, face the facts of what's working and what's not working, and roll up sleeves and do the work together. If you'd like to hear more about our story when I was principal and how we took away the intervention classes and replace them with elective classes, let me know and I'll be happy to share a little bit more. One quick thing about that middle question, I didn't speak specifically to that. I don't understand how students wouldn't have access to classes that they need. I do know that sometimes in small schools, they have to rotate classes being offered in every other year. However, I do think that students should definitely have access to the classes that they need to graduate. And the way that we did that when I was a principal is we had an students had access to an online learning platform and a teacher who was there to support them with it. So they weren't just sat in front of a computer to do what they needed on their own. There was a place that they could do credit recovery. They could take classes that weren't offered at our school, but there was always a teacher there available to help them. So that's just one solution. It does take the community coming together to support the education of the children and taking the staff being willing to ask and answer hard questions without being defensive, which is not always easy. Because as you know, those of us in education, we care a great deal about the work that we do, and it's part of our identity and who we are. So it's hard to admit that we're not meeting the needs of all of our kids sometimes. Thanks so much for the question. Please feel free to drop a comment, an additional question after the video, and let me know what else you're curious about in the world of public education, leadership, and how we can all raise the next generation of amazing kids.